That music was so fun. I just kind of want to keep dancing. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 2023 Latinx Kidlit Book Festival. I am Crystal Maldonado, young adult author of Inclusive Rom-Coms for Fat Brown Girls, and I am super, super excited to be playing Two Truths and a Lie Writing Edition with this amazing panel of authors today. But before we get started, please read our anti-harassment policy in the chat box. And don't forget to subscribe to the Latinx Kidlit Book Festival's YouTube channel. There's tons of good stuff there. And if you're a school, classroom librarian, or educator joining us, our school visit fund is back. So you can enter to win a free virtual visit from a Latinx author or illustrator, like some of the people here, for your classroom or library. You can find the link for that in the entry for the entry form in the chat. So we're going to kick things off with a little intro from each of us, I think. So I would like to ask each panelist to just tell us a little bit about themselves, share their pronouns, and then talk to us about your latest book. And I'm going to have Dan kick things off for us.
Of course. Well, I am Daniel Aleman, and I am the author of Brighter Than the Sun, as well as Indivisible. This is my latest release, and it follows the story of a teenage girl living along the U.S.-Mexico border who must leave her home in Tijuana to go work in the U.S. so that she can help her family. And I love writing books that feel emotional, but also deeply hopeful. And I am so happy to be here with all of you today.
Yay! Also, Daniel's books are amazing, and I'm going to say that about everybody here, but it's so true because it's so true for each one of them. So
I just have to say, Crystal just released the book yesterday, was it?
Yes, it was yesterday.
We're celebrating your new release. I'm so excited for it.
Thank you. This is like a really fun way to celebrate debut week, so I'm excited.
I'm happy.
Oh, thank you. All right, Camille, do you want to go next?
Yes. Someone's ringing the doorbell, so hopefully they don't do that again. My name is Camille Gomera-Tavarez. I'm a Dominican-American author, as well as a graphic designer and illustrator. My first book was called High Spirits, and it is now available in paperback this week. It's also available in Spanish, but it's a short story collection focused around a single Dominican family, and each story focuses around a different member at a different point in time. It takes place in DR, in New Jersey, in New York, Washington Heights, and Puerto Rico. So yeah, that's that book. And then my next book is coming out in February. I don't have the full version yet, but this is the ARC version. It's called The Girl, the Ring, and the Baseball Bat, coming out February 6th. It is my first full-length novel, but it's centers around 3 different high schoolers. So we see each of their perspectives, and they're all just growing up in a Jersey City high school. Each of them finds a different magical object that becomes their sort of talisman, and they independently go on their own journeys through self-discovery. Heavily influenced by my growing up in a New Jersey high school and being Dominican American. All of them are Caribbean teens. So very excited for that to come out. Yeah.
That sounds so cool.
Seriously, I know. And for people who loved Camille's first book, you're going to love this next one too. It's so good. So I got to have a little sneak peek at it, and it was just amazing. So Karla, do you want to go next?
Yeah, so I am Karla Valenti. I am an author from Mexico. I write novels, middle grade novels, chapter books, and picture books. My novel Loteria is illustrated by Dana Sanmar, who's amazing. And that came out last year. The Spanish version comes out this week, next week.
Oh, yay!
And it's set in Mexico. It features life and death, playing a game of Loteria, with very high stakes, which is the life of a young girl. If life wins the game, the girl gets a long life. If death wins the game, she dies. So the stakes are really high. She doesn't know this, and that's because she's trapped in this game. And so the book is actually a study of free will versus fate packaged as a magical middle grade adventure. My latest book is Esperanza Caramelo, which is beautifully illustrated by Elisa Chavarri. And this is a picture book that takes place in a bakery in Mexico on Nochebuena when a sugar figurine comes to life. And of course, magic ensues. And so it's a great book. It's in English and in Spanish. And I'm really, really excited that it is out in the world. It's inspired by my abuela, who was a baker and made sugar figurines that I'm sure came to life on Christmas Eve.
Oh, I love that so much. And it is such a fantastic book. I have a 4-year-old and we love looking at the pictures and reading it. It's so good. So as I mentioned, I'm Crystal Maldonado. I am a young adult author of rom-coms. My latest, The Fall of Whit Rivera, as Daniel said, came out earlier this week. So it tells the story of a 17-year-old named Whit who has just had a terrible summer, and she is determined to make the fall the best fall ever by getting on the homecoming committee and making everything autumn themed with pumpkin spice lattes and apples and all kinds of goodness. But then she gets paired up with her ex-boyfriend and they have to work together to make this homecoming work. And so it explores identity and family. It's very cozy. So if you like Gilmore Girls, this might be the book for you. There's also a fictional boy band that I wish was actually real. And all the while, Whit is also dealing with polycystic ovarian syndrome, a chronic illness. And so there's a little heaviness in there too. And she's just trying to kind of find her happily ever after. So that's out this week.
Wow, that has all the things.
It has everything. Yes, I am not known for my brevity, and so I'm just like, let's just put everything into this and hope for the best. Okay, so today we are playing a super fun edition of Two Truths and a Lie. So we are playing the writing edition, and for those who are not familiar with the game, each panelist is going to take turns sharing 2 of their writing truths and 1 of their writing lies, while the other panelists are going to guess which ones are true and which is false. So in this game, we are hoping to kind of dispel some of those insidious myths about the writing process, all of those things that you hear from everyone who has big opinions about being an author. We are going to hopefully debunk some of those and make you feel like you can write your book, and you should, and you could be on this panel next year. So that's our hope. And we hope you'll also drop your own myths and truths in the chat as we play so that we can talk about those as we kind of finish sharing our own, because we would love to know what are those things that you have heard over and over again and you're dying to know if it's true or false. So please add those in the chat. And we are so excited to be able to discuss those. Maybe we'll get into like a hot debate and we'll just be arguing and it'll be really fun. So, all right. Are we ready to get started with the first round?
Yes.
Okay. Yay. Okay, Daniel, you're totally going to kick us off. So tell us your 2 truths and a lie, please.
All right, here they are. So the first one is, I always write detailed outlines before I start drafting. The second is, both of my books had different titles prior to publication. The third is, it's important to be looking out for market trends and chase after the hot new topic.
Oh, this one is hard. Okay.
There's a little bit of truth, I think, in all of them.
Right? But there's also some, like, I have big opinions about some of them too, where I'm like, really? So I'm going to say your lie is about chasing after the hot new topic.
I agree.
Okay, well, you got me, because that is exactly the lie that I planted in there. And one thing I would love to point out is it is important to chase, not to chase, sorry. It is important to keep an eye out on market trends. It is important to read what is being published today, to have an understanding of what kinds of books are being, signed by agents, published by publishers. And so it's always healthy to have that market knowledge. However, where I find that this statement is false is in the sense of chasing after those trends. Mm-hmm. The reality, and some of us hear this, is if today the hot thing is vampires and we catch on to that, by the time we finish writing our vampire book, by the time we get that book deal or even that agent, if we're unagented at the time, by the time that book is on shelves, it's likely that that trend will have already passed. And we don't want to find ourselves in that position. So what I think to myself is I will read very broadly. I want to know what's out there in the market, and I will then make a decision of what I want to write based on what I'm passionate about. And there are times that doing just that will, hit the nail in the head, and we will find ourselves publishing something that just so happens to be really, really hot in the moment. But even if that's not the case, then putting out a book that you're proud of, that you feel passionate about, without necessarily chasing after what you feel you should be writing, I think it's always going to lead to a better book.
Oh, I love that advice so much. Sorry, go ahead, Karla.
No, so I also want to hear you talk about the outline, though, because
Me too.
I never write outlines, and outlines scare me to death. And so the fact that you always have a detailed outline blows my mind. I was sure that was the lie until
That's what I thought. And then because Daniel had the market trends in there, I'm like, well, that's true.
Yeah.
But chasing the hot topic, I feel like not so true. So you almost got me. But please talk to us about outlines.
Of course. But I am an obsessive outliner. I always say my outlines sometimes are full novels in and of themselves.
I bow down to you. That's amazing.
I actually have to bow down to people who don't outline, because I find that challenging, like to piece together the story as building it as you're drafting. It's a challenge as well. So I think that the real answer of what you should be doing is whatever works for you. And there are authors who swear by outlining. There are authors who feel that their creativity is kind of hindered by the outline. It always should be whatever you feel is best for your own process. But it's true, I outline very obsessively. And sometimes, it's the case for my books, really. I come up with an idea for what I want to write about, and I don't actually start drafting until, for Brighter Than the Sun, for example, it was like perhaps 2 years between the moment I first thought of the book and the moment I actually started writing it. And it wasn't that I was like outlining for 2 years, but it did mean that I was, here and there putting together little ideas for scenes, for characters, for potential plot points. And then once I felt like I had enough material, and also when the time came to actually, deliver a proposal to my editor, that was when I sat down and pieced everything together, came up with my detailed outline, and that's when I started drafting.
So I am exactly the opposite, because like you, let's say I have an idea, I will sit down that moment and write the whole thing. And it's a mess. No, and it's a mess. The story is a mess. There's no sense to it. And I won't know what the story is about until I wrote 80,000 words. And then I have to go back to the beginning and start over again. So those 2 years where you are very diligently thinking and organizing your thoughts, I'm just writing the same story 10 times, which is a waste of time. I love
that. I love that you just jump straight into it, because for me, I also suffer from a lot of like self-doubt. So the outline helps me combat that. And so for any writer to tell me like they just like take the idea and run with it, I really admire that. I think that's super cool.
I think I'm like in between the two of you. I'm just like
go ahead,
a Goldilocks. But yeah, I feel like I use the outlining or like the gathering of things as like my procrastination a little bit for like actually doing anything. But like if I'm having like, because usually my thoughts come to me like when I'm like about to go to sleep or like in the shower or something. So I just like quickly like will go on my phone and like write the notes and the scraps down. And then, but if I do have like an idea for like a fleshed out thing, then I will sit down and like stay up till like 3 a.m. until it's like finished. So yeah, I do like a little bit of both. The outline is just like, I mean, I when I pitched like my book for like this one, it wasn't like I had to like present an outline. I just said the idea to my editor, and he was like, "Oh, I will buy that." And then I had to like figure out how to write a book. And this is the first book I've ever written, so it's not like I have a process for anything. This is just what I did for this one time, and it will probably change in the future. And I feel like that's fine too. But yeah.
So when you guys outline, do you have like, there's so many different beat sheets or different types of outlining. Is there a specific outline pattern or structure that you prefer, or is it just whatever you come up with?
I personally love the Save the Cat beach scene, which I know is famous among the writing community. I love it. I think it's very helpful, and I think it, if you watch several like Pixar movies, Disney movies, they tend to follow it so closely, and there's something to be said about how, yeah, exactly, it works. It produces great results. So, and even if outlining is not your thing, I still find it can be helpful to, as you're editing and looking back on your story, looking back on your beats, to kind of take a look at that and see how it can be useful in your process.
Yeah.
I feel like I am so much messier, and I just want to hop in and say, in my brain, I will be Saves the Cat, and I'm totally going to follow those. And instead I just go on vibes and feelings, and I'll do an outline where it's just emotions. And then I'm like, what am I missing? Where is the conflict not happening? And so, yeah, it's so interesting to hear like all the different outlining styles and know that it's worked for all of us and we've all come out with books at the end, and we don't even know if we're a fan of our own process. And I like what Camille said about how it might be different for each book, because I have found that to be true. Sorry, Camille, I wanted you to I think I cut you off a little bit.
No, it's fine. Just agreeing that it's fascinating to hear other people's like processes and stuff. But I just sort of wing it and just make it up.
And
I use a timeline on like Notion to just like put like just a sentence or two for each chapter, and then it's definitely going to change as I'm writing the book, and it's interesting to see where that happens. But yeah, that's what worked for one book.
And I think, just hearing all of our different processes, like this is one of those lies where there's no right answer. Well, lies or truths or whatever it may be, where there's no right answer, and whatever works for you is the right answer. So there's no point, if outlining doesn't work for you, there's no point in trying to force it just because I'm here saying that it works for me. It's one of those things that we just have to follow our instinct and do what works best for our books.
Absolutely. Before we jump to the next set, can I ask, are you comfortable sharing what your titles were before they became? Because I love knowing that.
The original title for Brighter Than the Sun, I can't share because I am hoping one day I'll get to publish a book under that title.
Fingers crossed.
But one of the titles that I liked was Into the Sun, which I thought had a nice ring to it. But my publisher felt that it sounded a little sci-fi leaning, so Brighter Than the Sun was our compromise. And for Indivisible, which is my debut, which I have right here, the original title was The Unknown Life of Matt Garcia. And, the reason I included this truth was also just to point out how titles can sometimes change. Between the moment we envision what our own title for the story is and the moment that the book gets published, there can be, marketing considerations, there can be sales coming back saying like, we want a different title. So it can sometimes be a conversation with your publisher about, what the right title for the story is. And in 2 out of 2 of my books, it's ended up changing. So.
Well, thank you for sharing.
Yeah. For mine, like for High Spirits, it was High Spirits, but they asked me to take out, it was High Spirits short stories on Dominican diaspora, which is included in like the inside cover, which was my compromise. But they wanted me to take out short stories because there's a stigma against short stories, apparently. So they thought that it would impact people's, openness to reading the book. But yeah, for my second one, the title also changed, and it was just like a poll, and I just like threw out 100 titles. And The Girl That Ran the Baseball Bat was what was chosen.
I love the new title. Well, the title that you ended up deciding on, it's amazing. All right. Should we go over to Camille and have you share your 2 truths and a lie?
So my first is the best way to get through writer's block is to just write through it. A book's success is not measured by its sales or awards. And the number 3, literature is only as useful as it reflects reality. So.
Wow.
These are good.
is the lie?
Can you say them again? Those are really good.
Number 1, the best way to get through writer's block is to just write through it. Number 2, a book's success is not measured by its sales or awards. Number 3, literature is only as useful as it reflects reality.
I would call the first one a truth. My instinct is that is a truth. So I'm still looking for the lie.
The last one feels like it could be.
That's what I'm leaning towards, is the last one as a lie, even though the first one would actually be a lie for me personally.
Right.
But I feel like maybe the last one. I don't know. Literature is only as useful as it reflects reality. That's what I'm going to go with. That's the lie.
Because it can also reflect our aspirations. It can reflect things that aren't real, but we're hoping will be, or sci-fi.
Yeah, fantasy, right? Like,
Mhm.
yes, there's elements of realness in that, but yeah, I don't know. I think that's what I'm going to go with.
I'm going to go with the third one as the lie as well.
So the lie is the first one.
Okay, we have so much to talk about. Okay.
I'll talk about the last one quickly. The literature is only as useful as it reflects reality. So that's a quote from Nikki Giovanni, who's a poet that I really love. And I also love like this book, Black Writers at Work. I like went through it a little bit before this because I feel like that also helped me dispel a lot of myths about writing, because it's just all of them writing about craft and like answering questions. And it was written in the 80s and it's still great. Thank you. My poker face.
Yes.
And I was trying to like read things differently to like try it to make sure I wasn't putting too much intonation. But yeah, we could talk about the writer's block if you want, Crystal.
Yes, please, because I think I'm the same as you. Like that, it would have been my lie. I personally can't just write through writer's block, so I'd love to hear your take on that.
Yeah, I feel like also it's in this book, but Toni Morrison also is always on my mind when like I'm thinking about like writer's block and like when I feel like I don't have to write. Because just knowing that like in that interview, I think she was just mentioning that like she'll go like months and like years without writing and she doesn't feel the need to like push it. And I was like, I feel the same way. And I feel like most of like the writers that I admire have said the same thing. And she also said that she can tell when like a writer has written through a block or like forced themselves to write because it feels strained, and she can feel that as an editor that, you know, has to look through a bunch of manuscripts. So, and I think she said, and she felt that like if the writer had just given themselves the time and the grace, that the writing would have benefited from it as well. So I always think about that when I'm like putting myself down, because it's like you have to like, usually a writer's block is not really to do with like the writing itself, and it's something to do with the person, I feel like. So I always, you know, get offended when I don't write every day, and like people are like, oh, if you don't do this and whatever, then you're not a real writer. But yeah, I don't think I could like just like force myself to write. And usually it being something that is internal and like some sort of therapy in your life, something is happening that you need to like work through first before you can get to the page, and then it'll come when it comes. And it is frustrating to like wait as human beings, but I feel like the waiting is definitely worth it for me. Yeah.
Is there anything? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, you go first.
I was just wondering if there's anything that you do, like let's say you're up against a deadline or something, right? And you would love to be able to not write, but oh my God, this is due in a week or something like that. Is there anything that you do in those instances to sort of cope with the writer's block or be able to deal with it even in a way that like you wish you could, I don't know, take a weekend away from thinking about writing, but you really can't do that? Like, what would you do, I guess, in that situation? Not that I've ever been in that situation myself, but
yeah, I feel like that's also a thing. Yeah, it's also a thing that like gives you the anxiety about like feeling bad that you're not like writing right now because you're doing something else. And like something is going to happen if like you get to the deadline and you don't have anything. But I like have to go through therapy for like writing my second book and stuff because I was like overwhelmed by a lot of things. And through that, I just learned you could just like tell other people like that this is a thing that you're struggling with. And
Yeah.
I'm usually like, I was a kid that like I never like didn't do my homework on time, or like I always felt like just
Same.
very stressful about it. But I've learned that like you can ask for an extension and people
Mhm.
understand. I feel like especially as an adult or like in a career, like people are definitely more understanding. The only things that I've had deadlines about that like were more like hard deadlines. Like for this book, I extended the deadline like another like 5 or 6 months, and I just had to like let my editor know. And they were very like nice about it, and they were like, yeah, it's gonna be done when it's done. Like just take your time. But for like things like articles or things like I have to go in magazines and stuff, I usually like if I don't already have the idea, I'm not like pitching it to them. So at least it's like mostly done, and like I don't have to stress as much about like the idea making, and more just like letting myself go. And I generally find like, writing an essay or whatever is like pretty easy for me to like just say my opinion on a thing. And like also it might change or like come out as like aggressive, but I'm usually just like, pretty like honest and transparent. So it's not that hard for me to like go from brain to words most of the time. But yeah, asking for an extension is definitely something I learned as a life lesson.
Thank you for sharing that, because I think we forget we can ask. We're grown-ups and we can ask for
Yeah.
those extensions, and
And
there's
it's
nothing
not
wrong
like
with
you
that.
did something wrong or like you
Right.
failed. Like there's this feeling of like failure, like I couldn't do it, and so I must be a failure. But that doesn't really make you a failure if it
Right,
didn't
that's
come
not
to you.
true.
Yeah.
So, Crystal, I actually have an answer to your question that came up surreptitiously when I was writing Loteria, because Loteria, so for people who don't know, it's a little bit like bingo, but instead of numbers, you have pictures. And so as life and death are playing this game, they're flipping these cards. And these events, the pictures on the cards, are becoming events in this young girl's life.
Mhm.
And as I was writing the book, it's a very sort of high concept philosophical book. And so I got totally stuck and convoluted in the theory of it and in the plot of it. It was just this very complicated plot. And I got totally stuck about right before the climax of the story, which is a great place to get stuck. I was like, I don't actually know how I'm going to get past this. So what I did is I actually shuffled the deck of Loteria cards and picked the top card and forced myself to write the next scene using that card. And then I used that technique to actually finish the book. And what was really interesting was that some of the most critical plot points, for those of you who outline, came out this way. And so I
Wow.
actually, my big baddie, like the big villain of the book, actually did not come up until the very end when I flipped the card of the crown. And I'm like, well, now I got to write in some evil king. And he turned out to be the big villain. And so then I had to go back and add him back in from the beginning. But it
Wow.
was sort of like a very unexpected way to get through writer's block, just by pulling that up and saying, all right, this is it. You can't leave until you've written a scene that has a rose in it or that has this venado in it. And so now actually when I do school visits, that's one of the things I talk about is writer's block, and how it's a real thing, and how you can use these little hacks to kind of just help you break out of, whatever you're stuck in. And even if you don't end up using that, it's just to get you past that anxiety, Camille, as you mentioned, that point of anxiety where you feel like I'm stuck, I'm not going to get out of here. And just getting out of there might give you the space you need to go where you need to go.
I love that, and would never have thought of doing something like that. So thank you. It reminds me, sometimes I've heard other authors talk about these exercises where you're not necessarily planning to include a writing piece in your book, but you're thinking about your character and you're putting them in a different situation, or you're like, how would they react to such and such happening? And then that can help just inspire thinking about your character in a different way. So I just love the idea of being inspired by prompts or other things, other forces, and kind of in a way alleviating that pressure, because you're like, well, I have to work on this. I have no choice. And then it gets you through it. I love that.
One thing like I loved, Camille, also that you said was to give yourself I'm paraphrasing here, the time and grace to come up with beautiful writing, or with almost a continuation that your story deserves once you encounter writer's block. And I think about that a lot, and I think about also a phrase that I love that also helps me get through writer's block when I'm feeling, when I'm feeling it is, writing a book is just putting one sentence after another.
Mhm.
And so some days I personally may show up at my desk and may not be able to write more than a couple of sentences. But as long as I am somewhat happy with those sentences, then I make progress. And slowly, if I show up as often as I can to add more sentences, hopefully I'll get out of that tough spot, that tough scene, and move on.
Yeah, I love that. I think sometimes thinking about the big picture can be so overwhelming that we can get in our own heads.
Totally.
I have skipped chapters or scenes before too when I'm writing where I'm just like, I cannot figure this out. I'm going to move past it. And then sometimes doing that helps me figure out, oh, this is what was wrong. I didn't have a character that I needed in the scene, or something didn't happen, and that's enough to be able to go back and to sort of fix that.
Yeah. I also, like, as I'm writing, I'll put like brackets and stuff and be like, this is where, when I figure this out, this is where that's going to go. And then I'll just keep writing. I think I handed in like a draft and I had like still a couple brackets I forgot to go back to.
That's what editors are for, right? I also, before we moved on to Karla's, I just wanted to say I love your truth. A book's success is not measured by its sales or awards. And I just wanted to reiterate that because that's such a good one. And I don't think we talk about it enough. There is that back end of like, how many books have I sold? I haven't won any awards. I haven't made lists. There's all of these like goalposts we make for ourselves. And I remember being on a panel a while back and just talking about how, remember when the goalpost was just, oh, I hope I can write a chapter.
Yeah.
And that was it, right? And how we just move the goalposts over and over. And I think about that a lot. And so I love just hearing you, Camille, just have that as the truth. Like, actually, it doesn't matter if you have awards. It doesn't matter how many books you sell. Like, you wrote a book and that's enough.
Yeah, for sure. And the fact that it got into the hands of like other people and like even one person was affected by it, I feel like is a success. Even if they're not, I feel like it's like art too. Like if the artist, sorry, motorcycles, I'm silly. They do this every night. But yeah, even if like no one has read it, like as long as like as an artist you like achieved your intentions that you first made when you set out and like you accomplished those intentions, I feel like that's successful as well.
Totally.
So I so agree with you, Crystal, and I love the moving goalpost because that's exactly the trap we fall into. And it made me think of, I recently did a school visit around here, and at the end, I was just chatting with some of the kids, and I had some cute little bookmarks, and this little girl, she's probably a fourth grader, comes up to me, and she's shaking, and she holds out a bookmark, and she says, I don't know why this is so important to me, but can you please sign it? And that broke me, because I was like, that is success, right? That you did something that moved someone to come to you and to tell you that you've made this impact on them. And I was like, that's whatever, like that, I didn't know that's what I was looking for, that's what that is the goalpost, right? And to be able to have that, it's the other stuff is great, but at the end, it's like Camille said, like to know that someone read it, to know that someone was moved by your words, you did it. You were successful.
You did it. Yeah. And I think keeping track of that, even just for ourselves, is really important. And this is just such a silly suggestion, but someone shared it with me a while back and I do it now. But even you can do this with your day job, whatever. Like, I have like a little folder of stuff that I don't want to forget or that I want to come back to and read when I'm feeling that pressure, feeling down, stuck with writer's block, whatever it is. And it's just nice things. It can be a nice email. It can be a nice social media post. It can be just like, oh, I did this thing and I felt really good about it. And I highly recommend for anyone else who ends up getting in that dark space to do something like that for yourself, even if it's not online, like even if you have a little Post-it board or something, you won't regret like looking back on those nice moments. And appreciating kind of how far you've come and the impact that you've made.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
I love that so much.
Oh, thank you. You know, I love this comment too. This panel has gone beyond advice and has become therapy. Thank you, Joanne. So sweet.
And I also like Joanne's idea to use her tarot cards for inspiration. I feel like that's going to be a really fun story. I'm going to want to read that one.
Joanne, please find us after you write this because we want to read that. Okay, so we are about halfway-ish through. We've had 2 authors share their 2 truths and a lie. So I just want to do another plug for if you want to drop your truths or lies or questions in the chat, please do. We'll come to those at the end. And we'd love to just talk about whatever you want to do, even if it's just more therapy stuff. So let us know. And with that, Karla, do you want to go next?
All right. So number 1, when you are submitting a picture book manuscript to an editor or an agent, it's best to include illustrations. Number 2, books can take 5 years from when a publisher acquires them to when you see them on a bookshelf. And 3, many successful authors received hundreds of rejections before they published their first book.
This one is hard. I feel like the first one about submitting a picture book manuscript with an illustrator is not true, right? I think that's what I'm going to pick as.
Unless you're Camille and you're an illustrator.
Right. I think I'm going to pick that as the lie.
I think so as well. I'm not an expert on picture books, but
Me neither.
is that maybe you can submit your draft and then find an illustrator later, perhaps? I'm not sure.
That's what I'm thinking. And
the word best is what's throwing me off. So I'm like, it doesn't say like anywhere, like you should. It just says that like it's better if you do.
Right. But I feel like the second one, books can take 5 years. Oh, publishing is so slow. So that's got to be true.
It is.
Right?
Like,
and the rejections, like raise your hand if you've ever been personally victimized by the publishing industry. Like yeah, I'm gonna go with one as the lie.
Number 1.
So
okay,
yes.
Number 2.
Well, you're going number 2. Okay. Ooh.
No, let's do that.
You're gonna go with number 2?
Sure.
Okay, so
chances of being right.
what's interesting is with that question, or not that question, but that is probably one of the number 1 things that I get asked when I tell people that I published a picture book is, oh, did you do the illustrations, or who did the illustrations, or how did you find your illustrator? And the truth is I have nothing to do with the illustrations, and the way that it works, unless you're the illustrator, you're just selling the words. And then the publisher is hiring somebody completely independently to do the artwork. And most of the time, you have no say, and you don't even get to collaborate or tell them any of your advice, or they don't get to consult with you. You really are working on very independent tracks. Within the publisher, they have the editorial team and the art director team, and they work together. And of course, you'll get input and you'll get to see the sketches as they're evolving, and you might get consulted on certain things. But there really is a lot of independence for illustrators in picture books, and they're given a lot of free rein to conceptualize the words that you have sold to the publisher. And it's interesting because oftentimes you as the author have an idea of what you thought the book was going to look like. And then when you start seeing the illustrations coming in, they're actually quite different from what you were hoping or expecting. And that's part of it. That it's a collaboration. Even if you're not talking to each other, you are creating something together. And so that's, here's something that's really important. I think we should always name our illustrators, because they are doing just as much work, especially on the picture books, as the author is. I've been very lucky to have really, really gifted, talented illustrators working on my books. But I didn't get to choose them, and no way would I have ever found anybody as talented as them if I had tried to pitch my book with illustrations. So that's my 2 cents on picture books, unless you're the illustrator, of course, in which case I think that's a completely different situation.
And you've touched on this already on, how it can feel like what they bring to life in the illustration can feel different from what you had envisioned. But can you tell us a little bit about what it feels like just to see the illustrations for the first time, to see your story come to life in that way? Because, I mean, in novels, other than the cover, we don't really get to have that experience of just seeing the words just come to life.
Yeah, so the Esperanza Caramelo is the most recent, and I mean, gorgeous. And
Absolutely
so the
gorgeous.
minute those pictures that the galleys came in, it just like there's this moment of your jaw drops and you realize, oh my goodness, this person understood exactly what I was trying to do. And I never knew this is what it looked like, but this is what it looked like. The idea I had in my mind is completely gone. This is exactly what it looks like. And it's so there's that. There's the piece where they nailed your idea, your concept, but then the more exciting part is the things you didn't even think about that they have built into your story that has now become part of your story. And it was never yours to begin with, right? It was some magical aspect that they've added that enhances the story multifold. And it came from their imagination. And so then you look at it and you're like, oh my gosh, I never thought about this, or I never looked at it this way. There's a great example in Esperanza Caramelo. So it's a story about a cake and all these sugar figurines. So you're following the sugar figurines throughout the whole story, and there's this big crisis, and everybody comes together and they solve it. And then at the end, you see the cake, and it's big party celebration. And I realized the people celebrating at this party were the same people on the cake. So Elisa sort of did like a wink, wink. See if you can spot each of the sugar figurines as one of the people that's dancing or hanging out in this party. And I never would have thought of that, but it was such a nice little kind of nod to the kids. Are you paying attention? And hiding little things in the illustrations that just bring it to life in a way that you never thought about.
Wow. That's amazing.
That is incredible. It makes me feel like every single picture book is actual magic.
Yeah.
Because just thinking about you working on obviously, like you're working on your words separately,
right?
And then kind of giving them over to this other person, almost like a relay race, right? Where you're like, okay, now it's your turn, and then this illustrator gets to interpret those, and like you said, put those little Easter eggs in. That is absolutely incredible.
Well, and like you said, they're interpreting it, right? And that's where it can be hard as a picture book author, because you feel like it's my story, it's my vision, but no, it isn't. It's your story, and then somebody else is interpreting what that looks like, and you have to carve out space in your text to allow for that, because that's what actually makes the story richer than if it was just, I'm drawing what you said. There's this other opportunity to add another layer in the artwork. Picture books are magical. They are wonderful. It's a really, really fun medium to work in.
How was it going from, because your first one was a middle grade, right? And then your next one was a picture book. Is that right?
Yeah, and I have chapter books as well, but I think those sit really nicely in between. I started as a picture book writer, but the first book I did sell a couple picture books, but I feel like I've now settled into middle grade as a medium I'm really comfortable with. And the picture books are, when we were talking about writer's block, one of the things I do when I have writer's block is if I'm working on a novel, I'll just move to writing a picture book, or I'll just move to writing some other thing. So that's actually been a really handy way to loosen, the wheels and try thinking about things in a little bit different. So it's actually, I love it. I think it's a really fun way to flex your writing muscles to operate in these different spaces. You're still telling stories that are meaningful, that are engaging.
Right.
They're shorter. They're told in a little bit different. You're talking to a different audience. You're using artwork in a different way. But it certainly keeps you, it keeps those wheels turning.
That's amazing.
It's fun. Yeah.
I wonder, like, do you make like any like vision boards, or like do you like look at pictures and stuff like as you're writing to like inspire you, or like that you feel like would look like your characters as you're writing?
That's a really good question. I don't for that, but what's interesting, and I envy you, Camille. I know you said you're an artist. I visualize my picture books. I wish I could draw them, but they always come as visual stories that I then put words to. So I visualize them in that way. I don't visualize the characters, but I sort of visualize the storyboard. And then I have to find a way to say it so that somebody else can execute the vision that's in my mind that I'm incapable of putting on a piece of paper. So it is very much a collaborative process. And you know, so much of it is being lucky enough to partner with somebody like my editor who understands how I think, who understands what I'm trying to achieve, and can then say, I think this is the right illustrator to help take this book to where we know that it needs to go.
Yeah, that's cool. And like, how much, I guess, are you expected to like give feedback, or like, are you involved at all in like the editing of the illustrations themselves?
With Esperanza Caramelo, not too much. I think from the beginning it was exactly what we wanted. But with other picture books, I've had to weigh in a little bit more when I felt that it was really taking the story in a direction that was very different from what I had initially written or what I intended the story to be. And that's tricky because you want to make sure that you're giving an illustrator space to operate and to do their craft. But also I want to honor the story that I'm trying to tell. And so that's a delicate kind of operation, right? And I'm working with my editor, and my editor is sort of working with the art team saying, this is, you know, conceptually, this isn't quite working, right? I'm not weighing in on the details. This person should look like this, or they should be sitting here, but more big picture, this spread is supposed to be doing this, and this artwork is not quite conveying that. So how can we, you know, tweak the artwork to actually tell this story the way that the words are intended? But again, it's giving an illustrator a place to expand their wings within the book, knowing that it's not just your book. It's, you know, my words, my idea, but then the illustrator is also bringing in their art and their idea. So it's a very interesting way to partner with another storyteller, with another creative.
Yeah.
Well, and hearing you talk about that, I feel like also gives truth to one of the truths you shared. The books can take 5 years from when you sell them to a publisher to when you see them in a bookstore. I think that can be true of any book, but for me, it sounds especially true of picture books, because if you're going and you're like, here is the manuscript for my picture book, I imagine finding the right illustrator and then allowing them to have time to interpret it and figure out how they want that on the page. That must take a decent amount of time, right, Karla?
It's funny you mentioned that, because I actually put that in there because of a specific event. So I sold Esperanza Caramelo like 4 years ago, but I wrote it maybe 4 years prior. And I actually sold 2 books when I sold Esperanza Caramelo. And the second book comes out in 2027. And that is because we managed to get Victor Nye to sign on to Illustrated. So when you get to work with someone like that, you wait as long as you need. And so when we were pitching it to her and she agreed to do it, and they said, but she's not free until 2027, we do not care. We will wait until 2030 if it means that we get to work with someone like that. And so, yeah, the life of a book from when you write it to when you sell it to when it's on a bookshelf, I think the latest one for me, I have a novel coming out, I have a middle grade novel coming out next fall. And I've been working on that one for 10 years.
Wow.
Well, and that goes to show you don't chase the hot trends, right? Because
Right.
if you had been chasing the
trends
yes, 10 years ago,
Yeah.
Oh, that's so fascinating.
Yeah, it's crazy. It reminds me, I was watching a documentary about Frozen 2 that's on Disney Plus, and like how they made it, and like the animators were working on it as the writers were like writing it, which I was just like, this is so crazy. These people need to be paid $1 million. And like so much of the movie just like gets cut as they're like writing it, and like the scenes get cut, but they already animated all this, and I'm like, it's just art needs to cost more, and like it's insane that it gets
Amen. Oh, all right, Karla, anything else you want to add before we go? I get to share my 2 truths and a lie.
No, oh, you know what? I did want to talk about the rejections, because I do think that's an important one. We have this idea that if we start to get rejections, it's because we're not good authors. And I'll never forget, I think Kate DiCamillo wrote this great article where she said that she received over 350 rejections before she was able to sell Despero. And that blows my mind, because she's a genius. And how did it take 350 rejections? The truth is, most of us are getting probably hundreds of rejections if we're doing our job, because what it means is we're writing work, we're putting work out there, we're getting it critiqued, we're having people look at it. And the reason it gets rejected is not always because it's not good work. It could be because the publisher has something like it, or that's not what they're looking for, or it isn't the right time for them, or it needs a little bit of work and you can work on it and submit it again. And so I think there's this fear of getting rejections, when in truth, that's part of the job. That's part of what we do, is just building the thick enough skin to be comfortable, even when you're at the top of your game, still not, still having to get that rejection and knowing that, all right, that's why I'm doing this.
And I would say, like, the rejections at the start of the process, as you're trying to find an agent, while discouraging, as you said, they help you build that thick skin so that you can be prepared further down the line for the rejection that always is a part of publishing. Because, I mean, I don't think authors ever not encounter it, whether it be a negative review, whether it be putting a book on submission and having editors reject it. Like, there's always going to be that aspect to it. And it's important to have that, just that inner strength to sort of block it out and not let it affect us too much.
Which we never get. I don't think I ever get that thick skin, but I know, yeah.
It's always going to hurt. I hear you.
But at least there's something in knowing you're not alone, and it's not just you.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. I always like to go to like my favorite books and like see like the bad reviews.
I do
that too. Right, like that's actually a really good exercise. If you so you should never look at your own reviews on Goodreads. Just don't do it.
However, or anywhere.
Don't do it. However, find your favorite book, the book that you have read over and over again, the book you would die for, and go read those negative reviews. And I feel like that puts everything in perspective, because you're like, well, they're wrong. And so maybe someone's wrong about my book too.
Or like they have like 3.8 stars on this book, and mine also has 3.8 stars. It must be comparable quality.
Yeah.
Have you ever looked at your book and seen like where they put similar authors and been like, oh, well, thank you very much? A good confidence boost, I think. Okay, so my 2 truths and a lie are: it's okay to go a month or 2 without writing. Try to make your main character likable. And the last one is: tropes, cliches, and pop culture references are fine to use in your manuscript.
I, for one, am a fan of a complex, if somewhat unlikable character, and so I will call that as the lie.
I agree. I actually don't like it when a character's too likable, too.
Hot take.
Like,
all right, what were your other 2? Your first one was you can go for many months
without writing.
Okay.
And then the last one says tropes, cliches, and pop culture references are okay to use in your manuscript.
All right, I'm gonna have to go with 2 as well.
You are correct. That is totally my lie. And I wanted to include this one because I think there is this misconception that your character has to be perfect, especially when you're first starting out as a writer. There's this idea of like, oh my God, I have to make them really likable in order for people to like them. But I think especially as marginalized authors, there is something really special about being able to write characters who are unlikable and who have flaws and who are going through it. And in the same way that these other characters who have existed in classic literature for so long have been able to be unlikable and still be on those shelves. Like I think of Holden Caulfield, who is very unlikable to a lot of people, but is that's a classic character. And I think that as marginalized authors, sometimes there's this pressure to make like the perfect representation of insert identity here, the perfect queer character, the perfect Puerto Rican character, the perfect whatever character. And that is way too much pressure. And so I think it's best to just focus on making like a nuanced, well-rounded character. I will say when you do make unlikable characters, people are going to have feelings about it. Yeah. So my second book, No Filter and Other Lies, featured a girl named Kat Sanchez, who her whole thing is she makes a fake Instagram account and she lies as this fake influencer. Like she pretends she's someone else. So she's a liar. Like she just lies. And that's her whole thing. And it got people divided on whether or not she deserved a happily ever after. And I think that's good. Like, I think that's okay. And I think good books kind of inspire that debate, and they have you thinking about, oh, well, where would I fall on this scale? Like, what would happen if I did something like this, or if my friend did something like that? And so really, I just like want to put it out there that I was always so bound by this idea that my characters had to know it all and do it all and whatever. But like Camille said, that's boring and not super fun for the readers. And, you know, we want someone we can root for even in their messiness, and maybe even because of their messiness.
And it's true to real life, right? Like none of us are perfect. Like we have.
You're very likable, though. You're very likable.
I mean, I mean it in the sense of, like, we all have flaws, and there will always be, you know, those imperfections that perhaps make us who we are. And that while some may think that those things make a character unlikable, it's really what makes them human and three-dimensional at times.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I also, looking at your truths, I am an advocate for taking breaks, especially when I'm between projects. Like, I kind of need to cleanse and like kind of put the last book that I worked on out of my mind before I am ready to get back into the game. And so I'd love to hear about like how you feel about taking breaks between like projects, or putting your writing down for a few months. Like what is your process like, Crystal?
So, well, thank you for being okay with that, because there are some hot takes out there where it's like write every day. And we were talking even before we started how Stephen King is like, you know, write for 6 hours a day or however many words a day, whatever those, you know, wisdoms say. And I'm a strong believer that you have to find what works for you. And this is such a good comment. Inez had said, there's this pressure in society as a person of color to feel like you're not allowed mistakes, or your mistakes are somehow worse than others. And yes, you get it. That's exactly it. So we get to have those unlikable characters. But yeah, in terms of taking breaks with writing, I always thought, I'm going to be good. I'm going to write every day. I'm going to do 1,000 words a day. And I would always fail. Like I would set myself up for failure, because that's just not how I as a writer thrive. It's not how I create. It's not how my brain works. And I would make myself feel really bad for that, because common wisdom, quote unquote, was that you were supposed to write every day. And it took a while for me to be okay with the fact that if I need to take a break, even mid-project, it's okay. I can come back to the project. And I'm an author who's also, I work full time. So like I have a full-time job, and I have a 4-year-old. And so sometimes those things take over life. And so sometimes it's not that I don't want to be writing, it's that I truly can't, or I don't have the creativity right now, even though I wish I could. And so I think just kind of getting okay with the idea that your writing is going to be there. Your ideas are not going to go away because you took a break. It was really important for me and for my journey as an author, and also for my mental health. Like I didn't want to beat myself up every time I took a week or 2 weeks or even a month off from a project. And that really helped once I started to get okay with that and know that I'm not going to lose the writing magic. I'm not going to lose the ability, right? Like it's like riding a bike. Once you get back into it, it's going to come. And so that was really, really helpful for me. And I also love what you said, Daniel, about like taking a break between projects, because sometimes you're still living in the world of one character and it's impossible to get into this other world that you're creating of your next book without that break. Yeah. Have you experienced things like that too?
Totally. Yes. 100%. And even like, writing in a new voice, like sometimes you feel like the voice of the previous character like trying to sneak in, and you need to kind of like take that little mental break and however long you need to fully get back into it.
Yeah. I really feel like those like write every day or write to meet X goal every day is like a very capitalistic, like a Western like thing.
Amen.
Like, think that like non like American Protestant. It's like a very Protestant like work ethic. If you don't like work, like you're going to hell, kind of a thing. That like it's just.
Thanks for tuning in for hour 2 of our Latinx Kidlit Book Festival. We will now take down capitalism from the inside.
But yes, it's like Camille, if you think of like why do you have this idea in your mind? Like why is your body physically like producing anxiety over this? Like there's no reason.
I know. It's so silly, and a lot of it is self-inflicted, right? Like we just hear other people have opinions and then we internalize it. But then it becomes like an individual problem when really, like you said, the problem is that society is always like, no, work, hustle, hustle, hustle. But there's nothing wrong with taking rest. There's nothing wrong with, refilling your cup, taking a break. I think of that when we talk about writer's block too. Sometimes I'm just burnt out, not on writing, but even just on life. And so I need to take a break by consuming other media, consuming no media, going for a walk, like whatever it is, where it is like this recharging that happens that I think is just really, really important to the writing process and to the creative process. And if you're like that, there's nothing wrong with that. You're still a writer, you're still an author. Even if you didn't write for 6 months, like guess what? You're still a writer. I also wanted to get people's opinions on the tropes and cliches and pop culture references, because this one, I feel like some people have very big opinions on, and I love it. So we all love tropes, in my opinion. Yeah. If you don't, that's okay. But I just love a good trope. And so I feel like tropes and cliches are totally fine to include in your manuscript. But I know when you're first starting out as an author, sometimes you can get in your own head about like, oh no, this feels too similar to something else, or we've seen this before. And to that, I always want to say to new authors, like, yes, and it's delicious. And that's why we love it. Like, give me all of the, oh no, there's just one bed tropes. And I will devour that book, or, whatever it is. And so sometimes I think we can put pressure on ourselves to create the perfect book that doesn't have any tropes or cliches. Whereas for my latest, The Fall of Wit Rivera, I was like, how many tropes and cliches can I lean into? So we have like an enemies to lovers. We have like exes to lovers. We've got forced proximity. I was just like, oh, what are all the ones that I can choose to include in here? And I had so much fun writing it because I was picking out those things that as a reader brought me so much joy when I would read them in other books. And so it was nice to be able to pull that in for my own manuscript. And then it makes like talking about it fun too, because you get to talk about these things you love that are part of your writing process.
Yeah, for sure. But I definitely heard that as well from my English teacher in high school. Like you shouldn't have cliches and like stuff as a rule. I think there's also a Toni Morrison quote about like that as well, where she's like, that she actually uses cliches to her advantage to try to see like how she can use this thing that people say all the time, or that like is a saying, and like really expand on it and like really examine it, and like that in itself is going to make it interesting as well. Because if it's something that's like a cliche, like what is the reason for it, and like why is it that way? So I think about that as well.
I love that. And I feel like tropes and cliches can anchor a reader into a story that is going to be otherwise unfamiliar. And that's okay, because we gravitate towards the familiar. And where I think we can go wrong is if the whole story is just one big trope. If that's the whole point of it,
Right.
that's not going to be fun. But to use those tools strategically to pull your reader in, I mean, there truly is no original content. We're all redoing the same thing again and again. We're just doing it in a different way. And so the reason we like those tropes is, as you said, they resonate with us. So use them, but just don't have that be your whole story. Have it be the thing that grounds you and allows you then to explore a different take on that same feeling, that same idea, that same concept.
Absolutely. And I also think it's important to mention too, when we're talking about, again, marginalized stories, like we get to use those tropes and cliches too. So like, just because a story has been done before doesn't mean we can't also do it. Do you know what I mean? And I think that that's really important. So like when people say like, oh, we've seen 1,000 of that type of story, it's like, well, have they been Cuban? Have they been Honduran? You know what I mean? Like we're bringing other elements to our stories. And it's one of my pet peeves when that's a criticism, and it usually gets thrown at, we'll say, authors of color and queer authors who are just like, oh, I just want to write my little book about this thing using tropes and cliches that I love, that has been done hundreds of times, but suddenly it's a problem when I do it. So forget those people and get your cliches and tropes and use them in your book. And like Karla said, just, you know, you're going to add more in there. So it's not just a trope. It's not just a cliche, and you're going to make it your own. And that's really, I think, the important part of it.
Yeah.
What about pop culture references? Because I love a pop culture reference, but I know they can date books. Yeah. And so I'm so curious to just talk more about this. And then I promise we'll get to the audience questions.
Here's a funny thing for me. When I'm reading a book, I love a pop culture reference because it feels like Karla was saying, it feels familiar and it feels relatable. However, when I'm writing, it's one of those things where like my reading habits and my writing habits may be different. And like, I try to stop myself from putting the pop culture reference in, but I feel like I really shouldn't, because as a reader, I love them. So.
Yeah. It's like, it's what I said about like it reflecting reality. Like it's just like a reflection of like a time capsule of this time, even if it like doesn't age well or something. Like I'm reading Percy Jackson, like the first books, like a lot of those pop references did not age well. But like it's still like telling you a lot about like the time that the book was in, and like it really like helps you, I feel like, get into the mind of, you know, the mind state of it as a reader.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And I think readers are smart, and like even if the reference itself doesn't resonate now, like they can figure out kind of what it was or use the context clues for it. I mean, I am an avid Gilmore Girls watcher, and half of those references go right over my head, but I still love that show. So it's like, I think it's totally okay. Like, yeah, you probably shouldn't have a pop culture reference on every page, but I think it's okay to have your characters mention things that are happening. I think it's okay to have your characters on certain types of social media. I actually think it's kind of fun when I read an older book and it's like, oh, and on the Facebook or whatever. And you're like, oh my God, this is so old now. I love it. So I think it's fun.
For my latest book, I actually just recently, because there were mentions of Twitter, and I was like, now it's called X, and who knows what it's going to be called a year from now when this book comes out. So then I just like moved to other social media platforms and avoided the mention of Twitter.
I know, it's funny because sometimes that is the case, or sometimes you will be humbled by your editor. Like you'll have a reference in, or maybe this was just me, but I had a reference in Fat Chance Charlie Vega, my debut book, where it was so Charlie was getting like trying on a dress that she had just bought for this dance, and she was like turning on some music and dancing in the mirror, and I had her dancing to Rihanna, and my editor, who I love, I'm obsessed with her, she was like, just so you know, teens now associate Rihanna as like more of like a fashion beauty and not a singer. So we have to change this and either make it more retro or update it. And I was just like, oh, stab me in the heart. So that was, but it was fun. And then we changed it to the Spice Girls. So
Love
it worked
it.
out.
Spice Girls always holds up.
That's how we feel.
Yeah.
All right. Should we open it up and see some audience questions and thoughts and lies and truths?
Yes.
All right. So Joanne says, what author is your GOAT, greatest of all time? Or who would you want your career to mirror? That's a great question, Joanne. You have been killing it. What author?
I would say for me, like a big influence in my YA was definitely Angie Thomas, who wrote The Hate U Give, among others. I absolutely loved how she, in that book, she writes so humanly and so compassionately, and that was something that I was like, I want to do this in my own writing. So definitely a great influence. And another author that I really admire is Jodi Picoult, who has such a long career, and I'm like, I just want a career that is that long and maybe half as successful. So
I see this in the future for you. So
I feel like currently like Akwaeke Emezi, and like just the fact that they I mean, they're an artist and like I'm an illustrator or whatever, so like I feel like that they just like make everything like there are in their writing, and like they make music. So I find that really cool. And all of their books are like in a different genre, and they've written like 10 books in like 3 years or whatever. So like the work ethic is just like insane. But yeah, just like them like being very fluid and like going from like very different projects to very different projects. I've always admired, and I love every single Akwaeke Emezi book. It's just like a banger after banger after banger. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Karla, do you have anyone? It's a hard question.
It is a really hard question. And I think I'll respond to, I guess right now I'm reading Isabel Allende again, and Como Agua para Chocolate, which is Laura Esquivel, like the magical realists. And they're my greatest of all time, because just that writing, like being able to do that is so amazing. And so I think, I don't know that I would necessarily select one particular person, but just all of the greats in that field and all of their talent. I would love to just be able to do that, right? To just so naturally and effortlessly narrate the world in this magical realism profile. How about you?
Oh, depends on the day, but I feel like the authors who have a career that I'd kind of hope to emulate are either, if I'm feeling really ambitious, Zoraida Cordova is just phenomenal, is amazing at every genre, and has like this incredible staying power and her work ethic. Like I am just such a huge fan of hers, and I'm like, man, if I could just someday be Zoraida and just like do all of these cool things, I would be so thrilled. But then there's this other part of me that's like, you know, Jenny Han kind of figured it out. She wrote like 2 book series and then went to TV/Netflix and was like, I think I'm done. I think I'm just going to hang out with actors and post cute pictures on my Instagram. And I'm like, actually, maybe I want that. So I could go either way. What a great question, though. Oh, Dan, you're muted.
But you're so excited.
I know. We can't hear you.
You were muted. We couldn't hear you, even though we were so excited about whatever you were saying.
I was saying, I'm so sorry, I muted myself. I was saying I can totally see your books becoming like a Netflix series, like To All the Boys type style of show. I can totally see that for you.
I would die. Thank you. I hope. Yeah. All right. Do we want to do another question or two? I think we had some come in. Let's see. Truth or lie? Each
Mm.
book gets easier to write. Oh,
I've
for
only
me-
written
Lie.
one full
For me,
book.
it's a lie.
for me, it's a little bit of both. But you go first.
I mean, I can tell you, my first book was a joy to write. I really, really, Indivisible was just a book that flowed out of me. I loved writing that. And then I got a really bad case of book 2 syndrome where all the self-doubt hits, all the pressure
yeah.
hits. And I mean, it's a learning experience too, because it's I think it made me stronger as a writer and as a creator to go through that pressure and come out on the other side with a book that I love and that I'm super proud of. But it was definitely much more of a challenge than it was with my first.
Second book syndrome is no joke.
It's the worst.
So I think for me, in some ways, writing has gotten easier in that, like, I think I know better how to structure a story. So I think I know kind of the things to think about, the beats I want to hit. But does that make the words come any easier? Does it make outlining easier? I don't really think so. And I really did struggle with my second book so bad. Like I had such a hard time. So it was actually nice to come out of this, and The Fall of Whit Rivera is my third book, and realize not all of them have to be difficult.
Yeah.
But then my fourth book was a little harder than that one. So I'm like all over, which I'm working on now. I'm just kind of all over the place. I think some parts do get easier, some parts get harder, some parts just kind of stay the same. And it depends on kind of where you are with the stories and where you are in life too.
And in a way, like the things that make it harder, it's not the same thing. At the beginning, when you're writing your first book, part of what makes it harder is you're also trying to sell it. So you're familiarizing yourself with the industry and connecting and understanding how things work. And then later, your books are harder because now you've got sales numbers that you're competing, or now you know a little bit more about what you didn't know before, and you have higher expectations for yourselves. And so it's better, like you said, better in some ways and harder in others.
Yeah.
I agree. I mean, I hit that second book syndrome with mine as well. But yes, that's for therapy.
Amen. And just a plug for therapy in general. Like, shout out to our therapists.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Is there anything you all want to talk about, or should we do our last question?
Happy to do our last one.
All right, let's do it. Do we have one more truth or lie, or even just like a question from people that we want to talk about? One of the ones from earlier, actually backstage, was about MFAs, which I think is really interesting, which we could totally talk about after this. So what 2 truths and lie would your main character give? Oh my God.
About what? About writing? Or just about anything?
Probably just about them and their life and like, right?
Oh my gosh, Joanne, you're stumping us.
I know, you're so good.
Also, I don't have a main character for like any of my books because I get bored writing about one person. So like my short story collection is like 100 characters, and then like this one has.
Oh my
30.
gosh.
Maybe you're the main character then, so you can do truth and a lie for yourself. Well, one of my truths for Whit Rivera would be that she is a bit of a perfectionist. So that would be an absolute truth. And she loves a pumpkin spice latte. And I think one of her lies would be that she totally doesn't need to have control of everything at all the time. It doesn't bother her at all. That would be her lie.
I mean, just trying to think of both of my books. I feel like in my first book, because my main character is such a Broadway fan, as am I, his lie would have to be something along the lines of, or perhaps a truth. Let's frame it as a truth. It would be, I've seen Wicked 7 times, which is true of me. I've seen Wicked. I'm obsessed. I want to see it in 8th, 9th, and 10th, and I'll be happy person.
Yes, and for the movie when it comes out.
gonna be
I
so
feel
fun.
like the first main character for The Girl Ringing the Baseball Bat, who's Rosie, is very similar to yours, Crystal, and being like a perfectionist and stuff. I feel like her lie would just be something like that she's fine and she can just handle everything, which she says several times throughout
Lies
the
I
book.
tell myself every day. Karla, do you want to share a truth or a lie?
Yeah, so I think I would go with loteria, and I would say the truth is, number one truth is that her mom makes magical hot chocolate. Number two truth is that there is such a thing as free will. And the lie is that there is such a thing as free will, because that's at the heart of the story. Is there or isn't there?
That's good.
That's
2 truths and a lie just for that book. Like
Yes.
I'm here for it. Okay, we have 2 questions left, and we can do a super quick round and try to answer them succinctly. And then I think we're good. Truth or lie? Research is a necessary tool for writers and illustrators. I say truth.
Yep, absolutely, a truth.
Yep. Boom.
Truth or lie? Being on submission is harder than querying.
I haven't done either. I don't know anything about publishing.
I'm going to say that's a lie. I think they're equally hard.
For me too. I also think when you're querying agents and stuff, then once you get someone, you have someone in your corner. So for me, it's slightly less hard to be on submission just because there's someone I can be like, oh my God, they didn't want my book. And it's nice to not be alone in that.
I feel like querying can feel a little more like you're shouting into the void and you're not sure if anyone's gonna, well, I mean, it's true of both of them, but I feel like querying can amplify that because of what you said. Like you're alone in it and you haven't found that one partner that believes in you just yet.
Yeah. But it's all hard. So if honestly, we're with you in the process wherever you are. Yeah. Oh my gosh, you guys, this was so much fun. I hope you enjoyed yourselves because I definitely did.
I did, yeah.
So great.
Oh, well, thank you to our audience for the amazing questions, comments, lies, and truths. And of course, thank you to all of you for watching. And thank you for attending the 2 Truths and a Lie Writing Edition panel at the Latinx Kidlit Book Festival. Hopefully we'll see you next year.
Yay. Thank you, Crystal. You did an amazing job.
Oh, thank you.